I'm from a big family. I grew up around them all throughout my childhood. I'd often visit my mom's side of the family in the beautiful paradise of New Jersey. But my father's parents lived with me for the first 9 years of my life. And my Dadi, my grandma, like any other grandparent, had only shown her playful and cheerful side to me. That's all I really knew her as. That friendly, prideful old woman who would watch her Gujarati soap operas and love cooking. I still remember how much I hated those soap operas. That weird shift into black and white, you can never tell who's who, that weird dramatic music that plays out of nowhere, everything's edited the exact same thing. It didn't matter to me, though. I was with her. She expressed her love through cooking, especially her samosas. She was so very particular about how she would cook her samosas. She wrapped them in a thin tortilla with ketchup. She was old, and yet sharp as a tack. Then over time, she started slipping. One day, back in 4th grade, when she was driving me home from school, she forgot the same route that she had driven for the past 10 years. And then a couple weeks after that, when I was playing Plants vs. Zombies 2 in their room, she fell off the couch. I remember it like it was yesterday. When I asked if I should help, she told me no, prideful as ever. She said, "I'm okay, Beta." Deep down, I knew she wasn't. My Dada, my grandpa, ran over and lifted her up with all his strength, took everything out of him, and he got her up, held her in his arms, and waddled her back to the couch to sit back down. I felt powerless. I felt ashamed that I didn't understand what was going on or that I couldn't help her. So I pushed that thought away, didn't mention it again. And then a couple weeks after that, my mom picks me up from school, and she told me that Dadi had gone to the hospital. She had brain cancer. And just like that, she moved away from us to my aunt's. It's not like she lived across the country. She only lived a half hour away. I could still see her, but it wasn't like I was used to. Next time I saw her, she had staples keeping the right side of her head together from the surgery. But I'm a bit of a devil's advocate for a 70-something-year-old going through chemotherapy. She looked pretty good. That's what I told myself. She looked pretty good. Still prideful as ever, she refused to use a wheelchair. She insisted on using a walker. And slowly but surely, she got better. She took on that tumor like she was Rocky. But was anyone expecting for Creed to win at the end of that movie? Well, no one was expecting for Lolly to have a second brain tumor just 2 years later. And after that second surgery, she looked less good. The tumor was gone, but her brain began to swell. Her appetite was lower than ever. She was bedridden, broken, beaten down, and she couldn't get around without that wheelchair that she once refused. Then my parents filed for divorce. All this so close together, I felt like my world was falling apart before my eyes. That constant feeling like I was starving, but if I ate, I would vomit. It felt like claustrophobia, and with it came headaches and panic attacks, and the divide and the distrust in my family grew, or maybe it was always there. And I had pushed it away, just as I'd done with the couch incident. Even when I went to tell my grandmother that my mom sent her best wishes, my oldest brother, Christian, grabbed me by the arm, pulled me into the other room, and screamed at me. He told me, "You're making her sadder by bringing up this divorce." I felt like I was caught in the middle of a Cold War. Or worse, a Gujarati soap opera. And I was furious at him. But he was just as much of a mess as I was. What could I do? So I pushed the thought away, and I didn't mention it again. May 2nd, 2020 was about as normal a day could have been. That is to say, completely abnormal. It's 2020. My mom, my oldest brother, and my other brother were sitting around the room, and then suddenly, Ring, the door buzzes, and my dad comes through. And he doesn't necessarily look sad, but he looks out of it, like he's in some kind of a trance. And he sits down and he says, Dadi passed away last night. I couldn't handle it. I didn't want to handle it. So I got up, went into the other room, and I got my all-time best Titanfall 2 score. 32 pilot kills and 5 Titan kills. And I still remember that being my best game yet because I needed something good to mask the news. I knew she was dead, but I decided I would deny any acknowledgement of it. A couple days after that, I went to see Dada. And I couldn't wrap my head around how empty that room looked. That giant stretcher where Dadi was lying less than a week ago was gone. And Dada, who had laughed at the most violent and vicious scenes of Gotham, was just sitting alone in an empty room crying. Half of him was dead. And that was impossibly hard to see. So I pushed the thought away, and I didn't mention it again. I decided that I would accept it in a few months. I'll skip the 5 stages of grief. But when would I work it out? It's the pandemic, and we're learning about a new tragedy every day with no time to grieve. It's all Zoom funerals and hurricanes. I knew that she was dead, but it didn't feel real. If I acknowledged it, it would hurt. So I didn't acknowledge it. And I found myself angry and agitated and annoyed and anxious, but never for a specific tangible reason. I was angry that she was gone. I was angry that I wasn't allowed to say anything at her funeral. But that anger manifested itself into a deep and profound self-loathing. And I replayed every scene in my head. If only you had seen the signs! Why didn't I tell anybody about her falling off the couch? Maybe if I hadn't worried about her pride and I told my dad, then maybe she would have got the tumor early, and maybe she'd still be alive, and maybe she'd still be eating samosas with thin tortilla and ketchup with us, and maybe she never would have moved away and everything would have been the same. But how could I have known? I couldn't. Could I? But what if you did? Daddy, you always said that I debated too much. And I bargained with myself every day. But no matter how much I bargained, no matter how much I'd like to, I couldn't change the past. She was dead and gone, and I would never see her again. Is that all life is? Just a sad song with nothing to say about a lifelong wait for a hospital stay. I've been listening to far too much My Chemical Romance lately. I thought of life as pointless. If someone as kind as my grandmother could just fade away into nothingness, helpless to stop the inevitable passing. And with that thought process grew a nihilistic sort of depression. I didn't cry. I didn't let myself cry. I didn't let myself feel anything because feeling is nothing but pain. And I would bite into my fingers every day, and I don't even know why. Was it to feel something? Was it to punish myself for her death? It was my fault, wasn't it? Wasn't it? And everyone else around me seemed to have just carried on. But I couldn't just carry on. So I practiced smiling in the mirror every day. The grief wasn't a continuous process. The denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, it all just faded and overlapped. Until I reached a point where I didn't necessarily feel sad, but I just let myself feel nothing at all. Just agonizing, paralyzing disbelief. What I like to call an anticlimactic feeling. I decided maybe I would live the rest of my life like this. Maybe I will, from this point on, I won't let myself feel anything. But that isn't what life is. And the truth is, I needed to embrace my grief. That sucker punch. I had to prove to myself I wasn't just a sucker. So, I played every single depressing song that I knew from while she was dying, from The Flaming Lips to My Chemical Romance, just on repeat on headphones every day, just to force myself back to her deathbed. And I let myself see her in a new light. Maybe I didn't see some sad, starving, broken old woman. I saw a strong woman. Someone who had no regrets. Someone who realized that life goes fast and that it's hard to make the good things last. And she died surrounded by the family that she created, and she died full, with love and with a fresh plate of samosas with a thin tortilla and ketchup. I hate the feeling of grief. It's exhausting, it's unpredictable, but in the end, it's right. Because to embrace death is to embrace life. And Davi wasn't afraid of death, because she had one life. And to embrace life is to embrace feeling. And if she could feel happy at the end, could I be happy too? If she could let go of such a complex life, could I move on? If it's what she wanted, maybe I can carry on. Thank you.